Hola, ¿se oye? Por favor, si os vais sentando.
Hello, can you hear me? Please, could you resume your seats? Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Buenos días.
Good morning, hi.
¿Sí? Hola,
Yep, now, okay, hi to you all once again. Please, could you resume your seats?
Hello,
We're going
welcome
to
back,
start
and
on the
please take your
next session.
seats. We're going to start the next session.
por favor, si vais
Please,
tomando
please, could
asiento.
you resume your seats? All right, okay.
Bueno, espero que
Good.
hayáis disfrutado
Well,
del
I hope
desayuno.
you've enjoyed our breakfast snack after so much emotion. And, I hope you're ready now for the next session, in which we're going to talk about the situation of road victims within the framework of the European Directive on the Victim of Crime. But first of all, we're going to give the floor to Kety Morilla, who is our representative, the PAT representative in Andalusia, and a member of the board. Thank you, Kety. The floor is yours. Hi, hello. Well, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Please forgive me, but for me, it's hard, impossible to talk about this, to contain my emotion and to be able to hold back my tears. A person who intensely lives their emotions, just like I have experienced joy intensely, sadness too. So every time I feel sad, I cannot help but let my tears go. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's a kind of escape route for me. So I'm going to tell you my story. I'm going to try to be brief. I found Pat 20 years ago, just precisely because I did not understand what was happening in the legal case for the death of my son. My daughter, Angela, 17, Maria Jose, 16, had the misfortune to get into the car of an irresponsible person. Let's call him irresponsible. After the crash, my daughter Maria Jose survived with injuries which 20 years later she's still unable to overcome. My daughter Angela never came back home. But what I want to share with you here is that my daughter Angela was killed twice. One on the road, a new driver driving with drugs and alcohol at 180 per hour. But the second time was awful. That death was terrible. The second time she was killed by the courts. And I'm saying that literally. She was killed by the courts. When the case came to the court and I arrived trying to discover what had happened, something that I think a mother has a right to know why her daughter is never going to come home ever more. You need to know what happened. For better or worse, you need to know. And there was no attempt to clarify anything at all. A witness, a report full of incongruences, no real kind of investigation. A court secretary who actually said to me, what more do you want? Who, poor thing, that, he had his problems, that I was just looking for revenge. And I looked at her and I said, I'm not looking for revenge. What I want is justice. That for me, after losing my daughter, for somebody to say to me, oh, poor thing, poor thing. I'm never, ever going to see my daughter again. And that court secretary actually said to me that, well, you know, I was going to get compensation. What, that's it. And I answered her saying, you have the 90,000 euro and I'll take your daughter. I'll give you 180. I'll sell my house. I'll get a new mortgage. I mean, that 90,000 euro is not going to bring my daughter back. I want my daughter back home. It's cursed money. When I paid that money into my current account, I thought, that's what my daughter's worth. What the hell am I going to do with that? I'm not going to be able to enjoy it. Holiday? You're not going to go on a holiday with that money. It's the death of your daughter. A car? Buy a car? What did I do? I bought a house, which is called, I've named the house Angela, my daughter. There in the court, you know, they feel that your daughter's just like a dog that's been run over on the road. Roadkill, no kind of respect, no dignity. I just didn't exist. And that's when I became deeply depressed. I just could not understand that justice, which should have defended my daughter as a victim, was just ignored like that, that you love somebody so much, and then justice, which is the justice system, which has to place the rights of that person on the table, attach no value whatsoever to it. I just couldn't understand it. That's why I understood my daughter was killed twice. For the justice system, my daughter did not exist. They killed her again. It was so terrible. The burden of the court, that they changed the judge 3 times on the case. Every time there was a new case, a new judge, you had to go back, you had to speak to the judge, present again. The first new judge refused to accept the test of the breathalyzer. Why? Because the driver had said he was going a little over the speed limit and had had a drink. And as they admitted it, there was no need to show any more evidence. Nothing about dangerous driving, you know, having broken the law by drinking. Nothing. They were protected totally, the person who caused the accident. But the worst thing was 2 days before the case, I had to go with my daughter, Maria Jose, because just 2 days before the trial, the third judge had not even asked the forensic expert to analyze the injuries my daughter had suffered. So when we went and sat down with the new judge literally said to me, well, as you keep on appearing in the press making noise, if you do that, then I'm going to deny you the compensation for your lost daughter. It was a threat. And that's when my attorney got up indignant and said, you can't do that. And we got up and walked out of his office. That's why I say that these gentlemen continue to do justice. They continue to do justice. That secretary, court secretary, continues to work with the victims. For them, for us, for everybody. We've got this guide. Somebody asked me why I'm here. Why? If my daughter's dead, why am I in the Victims Association? I can't do anything for her. And, you know, I said, you know, my daughter is dead, but your son isn't. And I'm here for you. I'm here for all of you. I'm here so that all of you don't have to go through what we've been through. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Kety. The truth is that despite being used to hearing painful stories, I never get used to it. And I'm wordless when I hear such unfair, painful experiences as yours. And moreover, it's an example of these invisible wounds that we feel and stay with us for years. Thank you, Kety, for your braveness. Now we're going to carry on, and I'm going to give the floor to Aleksandra. I hope I pronounce your name properly. Ivankovic, she says Ivankovic, I imagine. You're from Europe Support, which is a European organization bringing together associations working for the defense of victims, and they do an amazing job. And recently they've been working very actively drafting the amendments to the European Directive on victims' rights. Moreover, Aleksandra is also going to talk about the integrated support of victims. Aleksandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yolanda, for inviting me here. And thank you so much, Kety, for your story and for sharing it with us. I've been working on the issues of victims of all kinds, and it's always, like, as you say, it's never possible to get used to it. And this is why I do the job that I do. I come from Victim Support Europe. We're a European membership umbrella organization, and we bring together different NGOs, but also governmental organizations from across Europe that work on advocating for rights of victims of crimes and victims of road accidents, but also who provide direct support to victims. What we do, and this is like where it's really important to talk about these things, because what we do exactly is trying to work on cases, understanding that prevention is never going to be 100% successful. There will always be crime, there will always be accidents, and prevention can just get us as far as we can go. I can tell you in general, the projection for the European Union that the European Commission has conducted is that around 15% of EU citizens are victims of serious crime every year. And that means that every 7th person in this room is likely to be a victim of a serious crime this year alone. And reporting is very low. So this is the difference between what we do for all victims of all crimes and what happens for victims of road accidents and road violence, is that this is usually the crime that's much more reported. So for the group of victims that you work with, I mean, it's kind of small graces, but at least you have better statistics, because for all victims of all crimes, we actually don't know the full picture, we can only project. And so just when I was preparing for this conference, I was thinking about how to approach this from the point of view of the support for all victims of all crimes that we work on, and then from the point of view of victims of road accidents and road violence that you work on, and what's the overlap. The overlap is in this criminal element, and not just the criminal element, but also in the sense of victimization. So what we have, and this is why Kety's story is so important, what we have is, and I'm also a human rights lawyer. Since 1945, Europe and the rest of the world has been working on developing strong human rights protections for all citizens. And in 1948 and 1950s, with the adoption of the European Convention of Human Rights and some other human rights instruments, we've achieved a milestone in humanity, and that's the presumption of innocence. And that presumption of innocence has to exist for more than one reason, because it was built, it came into existence because of what happened during World War II, and because of all the hate that was implemented through also like just arbitrarily putting people into, depriving them of liberty and putting them into different sort of situations that we could not imagine today, at least not in Europe. And the presumption of innocence is an important milestone and the foundation of the legal systems. However, what the creators of human rights discourse have kind of forgot or haven't had in mind at that time is the experience of victimization. So when they were creating the human rights foundations, they created them on the presumption that the individual needs to be protected from the state. And the presumption of innocence is there to protect individuals from the oppression of the state and arbitrary deprivation of liberty and convictions of people who may potentially not be guilty in the absence of evidence, etc. What they forgot is that behind every crime, or maybe not every crime, there might be some financial crimes where there is difficult to identify an individual victim, but certainly behind crimes that we're talking about here, behind incidents that we're talking about here today, there is a victim. And when the presumption of innocence stands between our experience of victimization and between the experience of justice and finding justice, this is where it becomes difficult. And as a lawyer, when I was doing my graduate degree, I obviously took a criminal law course. And I remember back at that time, we talked about something that in Latin they call actiones liberem in causa. And this is when people bring themselves to a state where they can harm others and they will not have control over themselves, but they still do it. And this is like, you know, people drinking and driving, or getting drugs and driving, or just driving at an unadjusted speed for fun, for challenge, for excitement, understanding that someone might be hurt, but still not fully intending to do it. And then this is when we end up in these legal proceedings, when everything's dependent on the finding of guilt. And where your sense of justice is also built to be dependent on the finding of guilt. Because in many legal systems, you are not officially considered to be a victim unless there is a finding of guilt of the perpetrator. And this is where things become very difficult. And this is why at Victim Support Europe, we start not from a single understanding of justice, not from the single scenario and a single sort of vision of how it should look like. We start from understanding, what do people need? And what are the needs of victims? And prioritizing compensation, as horrifically you've just testified, it's just one way of responding to needs of victims. We see that every victim of whatever crime or even incident, because as I say, like, it doesn't have to be, crime is a matter for legal definitions. And maybe crime will not be able to define what you're experiencing. So what we're advocating for is that the presumption of justice, presumption of innocence exists in parallel with the presumption of victimization. Because I can appreciate your experience even if no one is found guilty for what happened to you. And we need to stop connecting our sense of justice with the finding of guilt, because this is, especially in situations like yours, this is where we see that the system is not working for victims. So going back to the needs, we see that every victim in different ways will have 5 kinds of needs. And that's respect and recognition to start with. So if you're disrespected, your experience will be different. It's support and information. It's protection, especially from secondary victimization, physical protection as well, but secondary victimization, it's access to justice, and it's compensation and restoration, or restoration. And then talking about access to justice, it doesn't have to be criminal justice. There are other ways how we can experience justice. And if we, just by reducing secondary victimization, we can change people's experiences. And I'm sure that Kety's experience of justice would have been absolutely different had people in the courtroom been empathetic, and had they been able to recognize her presumption of victimization, all the while saying the evidence that I have is just not good enough to convict this person. Because sometimes conviction is also not enough to achieve justice. Sometimes it's a bitter victory when you get a conviction, but you don't get respect and recognition, and you get disrespected every step of the way. So these are the sort of things that we're trying to work on. And these are the sort of things that we're trying to implement. And this is where I see that what we do and what you do is overlapping by a great margin, because at the end of the day, it's really about appreciating the person and their experience, and making sure that we can respond to their needs, rather than trying to fit them into a mold of a justice system that's not adapted to actually recognize the need of people. And how we do it in a number of ways. One of the things that we are doing quite a lot, or at least trying to do quite a lot, is, for example, to train prosecutors and judges in empathy. And I had an interesting conversation just here in Spain, in Madrid. We had a training a few weeks ago on empathy, and we were training people who work with persons with disabilities, victims with disabilities. And then one human rights lawyer in the room said, I don't need to know empathy. I can represent my clients well even without empathy. And this is where I told her that she's probably in the wrong kind of business. Because if you want to be a human rights lawyer, if you want to be a lawyer who works with humans, you have to be empathetic. Because without empathy, we are just hurting people more, without being able to just try to put ourselves, imagine how it would be like to be in the same position. It's already changing a lot. And so this is why we need to train lawyers, judges, police officers in empathy, in effective communication, so that they don't harm people any further in the process. And so how we do it in a number of ways. One of the ways Yolanda already mentioned. So there is this instrument at the EU level, European Victims Rights Directive, that's actually at the moment being subject to amendments. And one part of that EU Victims' Rights Directive is the obligation to conduct individual needs assessment, for example, where at the first contact with the authorities, so like when a traffic accident happens, the police should be trained and able to do an assessment of needs of this person for protection from re-victimization, intimidation, and secondary victimization. And this is where it becomes important, because we know, the police know how to protect people physically. You know what the dangers are, what the risks are. If the perpetrator is drunk, maybe he can go and go after the person, or if it's like some sort of gang violence, you know how to identify domestic violence, you know how to identify those risks. You don't know how to identify the risk of a court clerk saying you're gonna get the money. And that's secondary victimization. So this is what we need to be able to understand. We need to train those people who get in touch with victims that this is absolutely unacceptable. We need to, your story, how you said, I'm going to give you the money and give me your child. I guess these are the sort of things that people have to start thinking before they say words that make harm, do harm, and commit secondary victimization. And so this is one of the things that we're really trying to do. One part of it is really legislation, and that's, I would say, an easy part. Honestly, that's an easy part. Spain was the first country that fully transposed the Victims' Rights Directive back in 2012, 2013. But in terms of implementation, we see that it's not working. And you see that it's not working, and it's not working for victims of road violence, it's not working for victims of domestic violence, it's not working for victims of terrorism. Even though there's a lot that's involved and invested in victims of terrorism, it's not working. And just to conclude with another parallel between actually and where it really becomes complex, and that's the nexus between terrorism and traffic accidents. And you were the misfortunate witnesses of this having happened just around the corner here in Barcelona in 2017 in the Ramblas attack, when a terrorist drove a car into pedestrians and killed people. And what you see now in Spain is that you have more than 300 victims who haven't still been recognized as victims because the judgment is pending on appeal. So there is more than 300 people who are waiting what we're talking about. And unless this judgment stands on appeal, these people will not be officially recognized as victims. And they've spent more than 6 years waiting to get recognition, to get compensation, to get support, because the system, as it's put, is not able to recognize them as victims of terrorism. And there is nothing similar for them as victims of road traffic accidents. So that's one similarity. The other example was in Stockholm, where a similar terrorist attack happened, where victims of terror attack did not get state compensation because the car was insured. So they were sent to insurance because it was considered, and the same happened in Germany, and the same happened in many other countries, where basically the primary compensation comes from the insurance companies, and then you have to go against the insurance companies, and you are treated, even though you're a victim of terrorism, you're treated as a victim of road accident, and you have to go through the completely different route. So there are complex things, and this is why we from Victim Support Europe believe that all victims should have the recognition and that all victims should have access to all rights. Of course, we can do prioritization of victims. We understand that some victims may have different needs, going back to what I was talking about, may have different individual needs. Victims of terrorism are symbolic victims. They need to be treated in a different way, but still we should not be making a hierarchy of victims, because at the end of the day, we all have our experiences, we all experience loss, and this is where we go back to presumption of victimization. So unless we have this presumption of victimization, unless we are able to presume that everyone who claims that they're a victim is a victim, at the same time as every suspect is innocent until proven guilty, will not be able to find justice. And this is basically the world that we're trying to build. So thank you for this opportunity to talk to you, and I hope that we can have a discussion.
Muchísimas gracias, Alessandra. Yo creo que
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I think that you've introduced the concept of the presumption of victimization, because that it determines it all, really. It's very important to go beyond the sentence. If there's going to be a civil or a penal case at the end, there's been a violent incident which has generated damage, maybe physical or emotional harm, or both oftentimes. And so we need to treat traffic victims from the beginning as the victims of crime, that the European directive, the statute of the victim, from the beginning protects them regardless of the findings of the court. I think that, moreover, it's also very important, the question of reparation that you've mentioned when we talk about when there is a death. Money is not reparation, it's the empathy, the protection, the respect. Of course, when there's physical sequelae, the money is important because people need treatment, they need things to be done. But when we're talking about people who have passed away, then beyond money, you have empathy, protection, respect, and dignity. Okay, so if any of you have any questions for Aleksandra, we've got a few minutes to field questions. Maybe there's questions from the people who are watching the streaming. And then here, if in the room there's anyone who has any comments or questions you would like to make, please, the floor is now open.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to hear you. I do have a question, because when we recognize people's rights, this presumption of innocence, it's because we are recognizing the rights that the accused or whatever has. On acknowledging this right, the presumption of victimization, we would need maybe to legislate to recognize the rights of the victim as well. Is that the case?
At the level of discussion of the ideas. So this is quite, I would say, revolutionary when we talk about presumption of victimization. Presumption of innocence is a constitutional category, whereas presumption of victimization is not. But we don't have to legislate to behave like we believe victims. And we don't have to put every single driver in prison because we feel that, you know, they're a threat to society. We can show our presumption of victimization in different ways, just in the way that justice does not only have to be criminal justice. There's other ways how we can do it. And if we believe the victims, if we believe their experiences, and if we have a system which can at the same time recognize that someone has been a victim, we can show them empathy, we can, if we cannot pursue criminal case, we can also find ways how to explain that criminal case cannot be pursued, but we still can find other ways for justice. There's restorative justice, there's all other sorts of ways of how to do it. But we need to start with believing the victim. And I think that this is the fundamental. So the problem here is, especially with road traffic, is that some incidents will be criminal and other will be misdemeanor. And then from the point of view of the Victims' Rights Directive, only the criminal incidents will fall under the protection of Victims' Rights Directive. And then if you have misdemeanor, then this goes under whatever else. It may be different in Spanish legislation, but at the European level, only crime. And then because it's very strictly regulated in national legislation, whatever are traffic incidents that are defined as a crime fall under protection of Victims' Rights Directive, which means that if you don't have the criminal element, you no longer enjoy rights from the Victims' Rights Directive. And in the case of the victims that you cover, this is a very tricky situation, because that really depends on whether the road was slippery and whether the speed was adjusted and whether there was enough visibility, and then you have expertise, and then you have another expertise, and then you end up with a classification that's not criminal. And then even if on the one hand victims of road traffic usually will be covered by compulsory insurance, so at least, and I think this is also maybe the entrance to this lack of empathy, because in comparison to a victim of rape who will not get compensation because there is no compulsory insurance against raping people, the victims of road traffic will get, at least in majority of cases, will get some insurance. So like you are better off than someone who was raped in a way. And this is where the empathy can go out the window, because it's a very materialistic world in which we live. And we think if you get a certain number of euros, this is your justice. And so this is basically what we're trying to say. It's not just one thing. It's not just guaranteeing this presumption of victimization in the Constitution. It's building justice systems that are made for people and building empathy in the justice systems to make sure that they can actually respect this victim from the very beginning until the final outcome, whether it's a conviction or it's just sorry, but we don't have enough evidence to proceed. So because at the end of the day, your experience is your own. And like going back to what I was saying before, in some languages, in some cultures, for example, going back to rape, there are some cultures where rape does not exist in their vocabulary. So they don't have a word for rape because this is a culture in which a woman should always be available for sex. And if you have a culture in which there is no word for rape, that doesn't mean that rape doesn't happen. And so this is, we need to find a language to appreciate experiences of victims which are not, you are a victim, this is the perpetrator, this person is guilty, this person is not. We need to think about building this reality of victimization into our societies in a way that we respect the victims and don't blame them for failing to prove the guilt of the perpetrator. So, but thank you for the question, because it's more a philosophical question than a legal question, I guess, at least at this point.
En PAT nos gustan las ideas revolucionarias, así que...
At PAT, we like revolutionary ideas, so we'll take that on board in our battle. Anyone else have any questions or comments they might like to make? No, I don't know if the people who are watching us online. If anyone has written any questions in the chat, Julia, I don't know if you're around, perhaps you could let us know. Or Amy, can you see any questions in the chat? Just a second, we're going to have a look and see if there are any questions. Take advantage of this situation. We've got Aleksandra with us. Okay, well, it seems that your message was very clear. So I think it's very important to believe in the victims, as Aleksandra says, that is the starting point from where we can protect people and not create this re-victimization. So thank you very much to both of you. And now we're going to go on to our next panel session. Thank you.
Bueno, pues.
Well, then, oh, yes. No, just give us a few minutes to change the speakers over.
Hola, ahora sí. Por favor, si podéis ir subiendo.
Hello, then please could you come up to the podium, Jordi Jané, Isabel López Riera, Nicolas Manes, Ms. Hilari too. Well, okay. Sit however you want, and Manuel Mascaraque. We are putting up the name tags, but please sit however you feel. Yeah? However you feel most comfortable.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias.
Great. Well, thanks so much to you all. Now we're going to start this panel session where we're going to talk about the institutions of justice and their role in accompanying traffic victims, road victims. Please, Emmy, Julia, we need to change the glasses. Could you change the water glasses, please? While we just finish up with this little bits and bobs of housekeeping. Okay, now bit by bit, the glasses, the water, your name tags will reach us. But let's kick off this panel session. And I would like to thank Jordi Jané for his presence today. I think he has accompanied us, I don't know in how many different meetings, Mediterranean meetings on road safety, and for the first time today as a moderator, which is great, you know, at times to change role. So Jordi Jané, many of you already know him. I think virtually I don't need to introduce him, but I will do. He is a lecturer in constitutional and EU law in the Judicial School. He was also Minister of the Interior for the Catalan government and on the Road Safety Council for the Spanish Parliament. He's participated in the sessions that gave rise to this guide, and I would like to thank him. And as I said before, as Dr. Torralba said before, all of the participants have done this altruistically and in a disinterested way. Jordi, we are aware of his sensitivity towards traffic victims, road victims. And as I said, I would like to thank him for being here today and for his moderation of the panel. He's going to introduce the remaining panel members, and I trust that you enjoy the session. I'm sorry, we cannot hear the gentleman at all. Good morning to you all. Now we can, obviously. Can you hear me okay? The gentleman is asking. No? A little closer? Okay. Well, I think that we should start this panel session first and foremost by thanking you for these 25 Mediterranean road safety congresses, but I would like to thank Pat and all of the other organizations, associations that work in pro of road safety. Their work is very often silent, it's intense, and they do everything that they can, not only to prevent accidents, but to help the victims. So thank you so much, Yolanda, and all of you who make these sessions of reflection possible. And obviously you cannot remain indifferent when you hear these testimonials, and also when you hear expert voices which talk about this problem, which is shared, throughout the world, not just in Spain. I would also like to once more value every time we have a tireless person in the world of road safety, such as Pere, who's the director of the Catalan Transit Service. We have the police represented here. We have here people who live with traffic, road safety here in Catalonia, apart from the panel members who I'll introduce, the victims. And this is where we need to really attach value to this, that the General Directorate of Traffic, the Catalan Road Service, General Isabel, and everybody in civil society. For all of you, I think this is vitally important. Legislation does not do this. This doesn't appear in the official state bulletin. This is a guide to help each and every person who finds themselves in a legal process, having suffered the consequences of a road accident, either directly or through their loved ones, and who on occasions find themselves faced with a want of understanding, with coldness, with a feeling that does not bring this humanity, this closeness, the empathy. Obviously, the laws have to be applied, and this will be very clearly explained to us in a calm way, but behind the law, there has to be an attitude, as there has to be for the driver, but also for the juridical operator, who then finds themselves together with these persons in a judicial process after having suffered a road accident. And who do we have on this panel? Well, this panel is very plural. And the idea is around the subject of justice, this guide of best practices, we sought to have people from different areas. First of all, Nicolas Barnes Mendez, he is in the administration. He is in the Department of Justice of the Catalan government, but it would be very cold, and if we weren't to say why he is here today. He is here, he's a psychologist, and moreover, he's in the special intervention program for penitentiary affairs. Thus, he has direct experience in everything to do with the rehabilitation of people who are in a penitentiary. And so he's going to talk to us about how we rehabilitate, help, treat these prisoners who are prisoners because they have committed a crime against the highway code. So thank you, Nicholas. At the end, at the far end of the table, we have a person who is exceptional in road safety in Catalonia and throughout the country, Isabel López Riera. And I think she is a DA, so I think she is part of the fiscal ministry, but within that, her role is of great responsibility for road safety here in Catalonia. And thus, she is far more familiar than anybody about how legal proceedings take place in the case of crimes against road safety. And in addition to being a specialist, she has monographs, she has studies, she has a huge CV of her professional capacity. She is a true humane person and knows how to put limits to what can be asked for by a victim, but shouldn't occur in the context of a judicial process. So hers is a position where she has to say, this is true, this is the case, but it's not here that this particular aspect should be dealt with. So I'm sure that Isabel is going to provide us with a fantastic viewpoint. And then after the DA, when there's somebody is condemned, they go to a penitentiary, but obviously the process also requires a defense process, and the defense in this case has attorneys that lead them. And here we have Maria Hilari. She is the dean of the Figueres School of Attorneys. She specializes in civil rights issues, but she's also on the council of the Catalan Bar Association. She has management responsibilities there, and she's going to give us an outlook on how all of those aspects that appear in this guide with regard to mediation, restorative justice, how that is involved. And to complete the introduction of this panel, we have with us Manuel Mascaraque, Montagut. He here represents a key player. We would not have a full outlook of the situation if we didn't have with us today a representative. He represents Unespa, the insurance companies. And here, the insurance companies have a great role to play, because on occasions, it is the insurance company that permits a faster solution, but maybe that's not what the victim expects. And at times, the insurance company can also help us to implement this guide of best practices, which we all seek to defend with our will, to bring our own grain of sand to the question. So that's the end of my introduction. And I'm going to start, given that I've got him next to me, I'm going to start with Nicholas. And basically, could you talk to us about what you consider to be most important? But we thought maybe what you could maybe convey to us best is how you in the penitentiary institutions see the rehabilitation of these prisoners who are in jail for having been found guilty of causing a road accident because they've drunk too much, taken drugs, or whatever. I'm afraid the gentleman isn't speaking directly into the microphone and we can't hear him. And with Pere Navarro, we've talked about this a vast amount. So how often, you know, I'm sure that the person is not the kind of criminal that, you know, you imagine is going to commit a crime because they want to, or thought about committing a crime. They're doing something in which they're, you know, fully responsible. They shouldn't have driven because they've drunk or whatever. But at the end of the day, we've got a person in jail who is not the kind of person that we believe would ever end their day or their life in a penitentiary center. So we're going to give you the floor, Nicholas. Off you go. Well, can you hear me okay? Yes? Well, good morning, virtually good afternoon, in fact. Very interesting, your question, but I think that I'm going to go off on my own track, because after the morning we've had, I am absolutely overcome by emotion. And I'm not saying this as something which is negative, but very positive. And that's why I'm happy to have been invited to the presentation of this guide today. So I'm going to start on the more institutional side, which is a bit of a bore, but I have to do it. I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I would like you to forgive Mr. Calderó, who is the secretary for the penitentiary service, who should be here instead of me, but because of a trip that has come up at the last minute, he's unable to be here. He sends his greetings and asks for your forgiveness, because I'm sure he would have loved to have been here, hearing everything that's been said so far today. And I said that I'm going to depart a little from the script, because thinking about what you were going to ask me, which is about what we do in our jails with these people who come in to serve a sentence, deprived of freedom, I prepared all sorts of data, stats, figures, so you know the kind of number of people we're talking about, the programs that we use, which I will go through very quickly, or maybe in a Q&A session at the end, I can give you these facts and figures. But particularly when I was hearing the testimonials that we've heard over the course of the morning, it made me connect directly with my own professional background. For the last 7 or 8 years, I've been working in the area of prisons. Now I'm in the General Directorate for Penitentiary Affairs. Before, I was a psychologist in Mascaraque prison in Tarragona, working with the rehabilitation of victims of gender violence, which is my own area of expertise, but also the rehabilitation programs. We had a specific program for traffic crimes, which we call Ponta. I was also in this jail responsible for this program. And now in the General Directorate, I'm responsible for supervising, honing, innovating in this kind of programs, both for gender violence and traffic crimes, also radicalization, jihadism, extreme right, and so on and so forth, all sorts of forms of violence. But my professional life didn't start with the aggressor, but with the victims. I don't know, many years back, I don't know what year I started working with the victims, but and as I said, to hear you this morning, your testimonials, the emotion has made me connect with the work that I did in the courts of Tarragona, which is where I'm from, where I live as a forensic psychologist, attending to the needs of the victims of gender violence at the time. So after the last presentation by Aleksandra, and seeing the need to work with the empathy of the different people involved and the judicial world in general, I was made to think about years back. This was something that happened in the city of Reus, but back in the courts of Tarragona, there was a case of a murder, gender violence, very serious. Maybe you remember, it was in the media a lot. And it was a murder. A man killed his partner at home in the kitchen. And if I remember rightly, it was with a kitchen knife. It was very gory. The daughter of the two was at home. And we don't know whether she saw the murder, but she certainly heard the fight. And she was in her room. And this man killed his wife, left her in the kitchen to bleed to death, and left the house. Left the woman in the kitchen dead, and the daughter of the two, he left her there in her room, having heard everything that had happened. So my work there was the next day. I had to interrogate this girl as a witness, so that then the report I issued could be used, defended by me in the court, to assess a series of factors, such as any sequelae that she may had, whether she had seen the murder, whether there was anybody else involved, all that sort of thing, or the more legal things which go beyond me. I'm a psychologist. This girl she knew that something awful had happened, but I think she dissociated and just went to bed. And the next morning she got up, went to bed dressed. She got up in the same clothes, went to the kitchen, saw her mother, took her satchel and went to school. At school, they were surprised because she'd never gone alone to school. She was like 5, 6 years old, the girl. And obviously they asked her, how is it you came on your own? And she said, I think something's happened to my mum. She's at home. And this kicked off the police, and they saw what had happened. They detained the father and so on and so forth. Just imagine. I mean, I'd been working with victims of gender violence for years, and I'd seen things of all sorts, you can believe me, but that was one of the worst days of my professional life, to have to talk to this poor girl. And my main function was to get evidence from her. That was my job, to stand in front of her and get a virgin testimonial of what had happened precisely. Obviously, this girl was dissociated. She was in shock. It made it hard for her to talk about what had happened. And I thought, well, this is when I had to forget about protocols to get a testimony, a valid testimony from anybody. And with great respect, as I saw she was blocked, I asked her if she wanted me to hold her hand to help her to speak. She said, please. And she was surprised even that I asked her, but she said yes. And of course, as she continued to be blocked, I said, do you want to sit on my lap to talk about what happened? Because I do have to ask you about what happened yesterday, but maybe you'll feel happier if you're close to me and I can hug you. And the girl said, please. And more or less, I think that thanks to that, we were able to allow the girl to speak, not just with words, but also with her drawings, to explain things that were important for the legal case, but also for her. I felt awful after that declaration, even though I'm very professional. I'm a psychologist and I have all the mechanisms you could ever want to apparently defend myself emotionally, but I was a wreck after that. And what most surprised me was that when I came out, I was ticked off. I was told off because I'd held her hand and because I'd let her sit on my lap. And because that meant that I'd given, as a forensic psychologist, I'd given more importance to my emotions than to the testimony. People tried to convince me that this could, prejudice the legal case. And I mean, as I've been working with this kind of thing for years, I said I couldn't care less. At that time, the most important thing to me at that moment was to attend to the emotional needs of this girl, because judicially it was very clear that the murderer was who he was. He'd been detained, and whether or not that could mean 1, 3, 5, 10 years more of prison, the important thing was that the victim, the survivor of that awful situation, right from the beginning, was emotionally contained, supported, heard, attended to. In the case, I was also, after a time as a forensic psychologist, I had to go to the court and I was asked what kind of sequelae this girl could have for the future after experiencing something like that. I said, look, I'm a psychologist. I don't have a crystal ball. I didn't know. I felt that this was going to be a huge hole in her, or I don't know what word to use, a very complex thing in her life history, and it could only be offset by huge amounts of love. And that the family that was going to foster this girl, I thought that they were able to give her all of the love she needed. She was only little, and I saw that, she was going to come out well. There was a good prognosis, but I think the judicial services, the social services should put in place whatever mechanisms were required to keep a close eye on her. Well, you've made me start with this because I think that in the legal system, there's such a huge need for empathy to attend to the emotional needs of everybody involved in the legal process, the victim, and even the aggressor, the accused, who I work with now after having worked with victims for many years. I thought, before Dr. Torralba made me think about the philosophical current of perspectivism. I like that because now I'm very familiar with gender violence from the victim's point of view, but I really want to understand it from the perpetrator's point of view. What happens with the perpetrator? Why they do it, and how we can help them never to do it again. And how, in this process of helping people never to do it again, we can include the needs not just of the perpetrator, but also of the victim of this crime. Well, then, that's our work in the prison, to care for people who, without a doubt, are guilty. I mean, that everything's over with. Oftentimes, our first interview with them, they continue to say they're innocent and that this day, that day, or whatever happened. But once you've made them aware of where they are, and for me, you say, look, as a psychologist, you're not going to trick me. I'm there to help you, not to free you. And that's another thing. But our work in the prison service, even though society doesn't quite understand this as a whole, our work is to help them as people too. And we think that by helping them, we're helping society as a whole and future victims. One of the testimonials said before that she wasn't there for her daughter, who was no longer there, but for the children of other people who are still alive. That's our work too, to work with the perpetrators, with people condemned for crimes, in this case, road crimes, so that when they leave prison, they're never going to do anything like what they did before. They're not going to make the same mistake again, if you want to call it that. So we in the prison service here in Catalonia, you know that the Catalan prison service, Catalonia, has different areas of authority. So we work differently to the way the prison service works in the rest of Spain. We work in this respect. I mean, I'd show you, I've read this 6 or 7 times because I think this is very interesting, not just for traffic crimes, but for any kind of crime, such as gender violence, as I said. And there's a section I love very much related to our work in the prisons, which say, in this context, the process of the call for penal and civil responsibility should also seek the reparation of the consequences deriving from the crime and the creation of an awareness and the effective correction of the behavior of the perpetrators, who in certain cases could be related to psychological disturbance, which would require the right kind of rehabilitation without limiting it to a retributive dimension nor fostering attitudes of revenge. I've underscored this because it's basically, that is the way we work in the Catalan prison model with the rehabilitation system we have in Catalonia. For some years, we work with what we call a rehabilitation model based on the needs of the individual, on verifying what personal needs were not covered for this person at the time when they committed the crime, to work on these necessities of theirs at the time, so that when they leave prison, they're never going to behave in the same undesirable way. And in the specific case, I could talk about gender violence, which is my main area of expertise, but I am increasingly involved now with the question of traffic crimes. And now that's one of my areas of responsibility. And as I was saying, this question of attending the needs of the individual in prison, what we do is we attempt to do it simply placing the victim at the center of any rehabilitation work that's done in the prison. That means bearing you in mind. That is to say, the organizations which, thank goodness, are working on these issues and which have helped us for so many years in the prisons to make the voices of those condemned heard, to have them listen to your testimonials too, your life experience too. It's very important that we can work in prison with this, with you, with your organizations. For many years, we've worked obviously with Pat. Today, I've met Vicente here. Also, we work with other organizations, Stop Accidents, Man with the General Director of Traffic, the Catalan Traffic Service, with the Driving School Association of Catalonia. And with all of them, our main goal, I mean, we have other subsidiary goals, which I don't need to explain here, but our main goal is that, so that in the process of the rehabilitation of the perpetrator, the person condemned who is serving a sentence, that they always have the role of the victim, the consequences that what they've done has had on these people's lives. And we're trying to do this more and more, approaching more and more what we call a restorative process. That means bringing the victim, if not the direct victim of the crime, but the victims of crimes similar to theirs, to hear their testimony and to exchange with them, to talk about what they've felt. And I think that this is restorative for many of the victims, and likewise, from the point of view of rehabilitation, very interesting for the criminals, those who've been condemned, the prisoner. Nicholas, we can talk more later. Okay. So I could say more. I was going to talk about the programs now, but maybe I'd go on too long. Okay, let's stop there. I mean, you've set the scene there, and we want to have this plurality. Excuse me, plurality. Let's give the floor to Isabel. I think your example was great because Nicholas's example, somebody told him off for, not having followed the protocol, and that he hadn't followed, and this could prejudice the case, that you'd held her hand, you'd sat her on your knee, you did what the victim needed. So when you're told off for not having done what you should have done, something's wrong there. And so let's give the floor to Isabel so that in a way she can talk to us about the penal process. I'm sorry, the gentleman is not speaking into the microphone. I'm sorry, if the gentleman is not looking at the microphone, we can't hear him. How that could prejudice the victim. And I'm sure there are stumbling blocks that need to be overcome, but what is your view, how we could improve, whether there are perhaps changes maybe in protocol and maybe also in the regulation? So Isabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jordi. First of all, I would like to thank you for being here and thank you for giving me the opportunity to elaborating these guides. When you are suggested to do this, you say yes, of course, you agree, but you never know where it will end. I am very practical. Those of you who know me, you know that sometimes for me it is difficult just to sit down and talk, but for me this has been very enriching. I've learned about different visions, and I do have a relationship with victims, and many times I've heard of personal stories of many of the victims, but this has changed my perspective. I think that this guide should be in the hands of those who should have it. It shouldn't just be a leaflet which is well edited. No, it shouldn't be an individual reading. Jordi, Jané, I don't know if through the Bars Association or through the prosecution unit, I don't know if you should distribute this, because I want people to read it, but to really read it with a real perspective. As for your question on the criminal proceedings, when I hear testimonials such as Kety's testimonials, I feel embarrassed. And the truth is that this is not the first time, and it won't be the last time that I listen to this, to see how judges, prosecutors approach these issues like this. It is very necessary to focus on empathy. This has been mentioned, but I would like to tell you about an anecdote for you to understand our perspective. When there's victims in the proceedings, and for example, I work in Barcelona and I take care of severe injuries and also deaths. So my cases are always very severe. There's always victims. And the anecdote I wanted to talk about is that 10 years ago, we prosecutors, we take shifts and we celebrate all of the cases that we have on a day. And there was a day where I had 10 cases and I was preparing them, and I opened a folder and I saw the children ill treatment. I started studying all of the documentation. I saw that it was about a minor, separate parents, and the one who started the procedure and who went to the court or the social services was the pediatrician in the checkup. So I see the statement of the mother, of the minor, what the pediatrician has said, and then I just think, okay, it's good that it's the doctor that has detected this. For me as a prosecutor, this is good. It's a good starting point. And then the cases go on, and then we come to this case, and then comes the first witness. And when the minor gets in, I just think, oh, this face rings a bell. I don't know where I know him from, but I know this guy. And then I see the mother and I freeze, because I know the mother. She's not a good friend of mine, but she's a well-known person of mine. And anyway, we finish the whole process. We don't talk about this case anymore. And I was 2 days without sleeping. So for me, this was a case that, as a prosecutor, I just thought this is going to be easy. I'll talk to the mother, to the testimonials, teachers, the son, the pediatrician, and then 2 days without sleeping. Why? Because I went from pure work to see a person that I know, that, we share some spaces, some social personal spaces from time to time that I could have breakfast with. And then my whole perspective shifted. And I wanted to mention this because behind each file, each case, there's victims. The family, relatives, the people that are left in very complex situations. And for me, it is a must, things like what Kety said, there's many victims like that, and this should not happen. So it's about being empathetic. Maybe you shouldn't feel too close, because otherwise you won't be able to live your everyday life. Because, we prosecutors, we don't have a direct touch with people. We were talking with Maria about it before. The lawyers, they know about the personal cases. We prosecutors, we have a distance there. And it should be like that, because if we don't establish this distance, maybe we wouldn't be able to carry out our job well. But, okay, you don't need to take the suffering home every day, but you should feel a little bit of empathy too. So for me, one of the key elements in a criminal proceeding is that we should not forget that we need to have criminal responsibility, and that our job is about this. So but we also need to take into account the expectations of victims. But the the judging process is not for victims. The lawyer should convey to their clients that what we're going to talk about is the responsibility of the criminal, but it is obvious that the victim should also need to feel relieved. Obviously, even if we put in jail the criminal for 5 years, the victim is not going to be totally relieved, but we should take that into account. And then proceedings shouldn't be eternal. There's many civil situations that are not solved. And many times with these death cases, the proceedings get very long. There's the judge, there's the prosecutor, there's the lawyer, there's the attorney, there's those with the civil responsibility, the car and this and that. It gets very long, even if legally it is not very complex. So for me, this is one of my objectives, to get to the criminal court with a civil responsibility obstacle solved. Obviously, we need to talk about it, but many times we get to court and there is an economic agreement. So why don't you do it on the first year instead of on year 3? Because for these victims, the economic situation is also important. And for victims with physical consequences, these compensations are very important. You know, if you're tetraplegic or whatever, you need that compensation. And the cases take so long, 3 years, or most of them. And we should make these processes faster. And finally, what Professor Torralba said is also important. We need to boost and foster mediation in this kind of procedures. There are some issues, regardless of the criminal proceeding, because sometimes we could take these cases in different stages, you know. We could even wait until the execution of the resolution. We believe that in our experiences that we have had in prosecution, if we take people to mediation, there is a relief and there is like a meeting point. At the end of the day is to try and solve the pain, and you achieve it through mediation, because sometimes because of the profile of the criminal you cannot do anything, but sometimes because of the profile of the criminal the mediation is possible, and that's a good relief for both sides. So for me, in my opinion, these are the 3 most important topics that I would like to put on the table. Thank you very much. And now we're going to give the floor to Maria, because she, as a lawyer, she can tell us what is the contact with the victims, if they feel well supported or not, but also this idea of more mediation, restorative justice. We're also interested in the point of view of Maria as a lawyer. Yes, good morning. I would like to thank, on behalf of the institution I work for these sessions. And as for the questions, well, the reality and the testimonials that we have had in the other roundtables, with a huge emotional bulk, as Kety has told us, well, it proves that there's a lot to be done in this field. We need to accompany victims more, victims of traffic accidents, from scratch, from the very beginning, since the accident takes place. It is true that in courts we're very cold, unfortunately. The legal processes are really focusing on the not so much on the victim, but on the victimizer. So we should also focus on the traffic victims for the whole process. We need to improve attention, the accompaniment of victims on behalf of all of the legal agents. Here I'm talking about the police, the prosecutors, the judges, attorneys, everyone, all of the legal agents should be involved in these topics. A person who has been a victim of road violence, as we can see in the best practice guides, there's like a before and an after in their daily lives. This is a highly traumatic event. And if we add the lack of information and the zero accompaniment that we have right now in the legal processes, well, this means that there's no right assistance for victims. Maybe we should accompany them as we accompany gender violence victims. We are accompanying them from the very beginning. This is something that we've achieved not long ago, and probably we should have this accompanying in other kinds of victims. These legal processes involve a re-victimization, because the truth is that the victim needs to declare in several occasions, because judges change, as they've told us. They need to go to forensic experts in several occasions. Maybe one day they cannot go there. Sometimes you stop the process because of the workload. Maybe we could record declarations, and then we would avoid having the victim going through this trauma over and over again, because sometimes the accident takes place in the year 2000, they have to come in 2002, 2005, and the sentence and the resolution comes out in 2007, because many times the victims do not remember in what second, in what kilometer it took place. So sometimes there's contradictions in these topics because the legal process get too long, and that is also affecting the grieving of the victim, and also legal resolutions sometimes frustrate us as victims, because when we get a compensation, as Kety said, even if it's 100,000 euros, it does not cure your wound. It doesn't give your relative back. It doesn't solve that void. It doesn't solve that moral psychosocial needs that you have at that time. So this is why I believe this guide is very important. We should use it to have kinder justice for victims, with respect, with empathy, with a dignified, human, sensible treatment. The victim needs to feel hugged, welcomed, as the girl that Nicolas was talking about in his story. The victim needs to know that they are accompanied. All of this makes us think that maybe the legal process nowadays doesn't offer this accompaniment. And in this case, mediation is very important. And in this case, the party should be the protagonist of the resolution of the conflict. Restorative justice does that. We need to repair the harm, and even after the criminal procedure, we should focus on this reparation, this space in which the victim and the victimizer can find a meeting point, so that the victim can talk to the victimizer, for the victimizer to understand the pain that his behavior has caused, so that he can ask sorry. And that's essential for the victim, because maybe the victimizer caused this accident, but maybe this person is not aware, or maybe the victim is not aware that the victimizer hasn't slept for a week. And this reparation cannot take place in judiciary proceeding. Many times the legal system does not give useful answers, neither to the victim nor the victimizer. In restorative justice, it's not about punishing, it's about repairing the victim, and to have a responsibility on behalf of the victimizer. With restorative justice, we need to compensate that harm in positive actions, both for the victim, so as to palliate, if we can, that harm. Obviously, if you've lost a family relative, you cannot palliate that. But if we give the victimizer the possibility to try and solve, if possible, the harm that the victim went through, and saying sorry, being responsible for their behavior, well, that's not going to help the family relative come back, but maybe the pain inside won't be that hard. This is a voluntary thing on both sides, and the communication between both sides give this deeper reflection that is necessary in all of this process. The victim would have the possibility to be listened. She will be able to explain how she feels, what the sequelae are, what the discomfort is. The victim can talk about her own needs and what they really need. And on the other hand, we have the possibility to listen to the explanations of the victimizer and to get that sincere sorry, to connect with humanity so as to overcome the victimization, the sequelae of the crime, and also the fear that these events won't be repeated. As Kety said, she doesn't have her daughter. Her daughter won't come back, but this is for this not to happen again. This restorative justice has a temporary approach. Traditional justice is focusing on the past. This is a fact from the past. And that's how it is catalogued in the criminal justice. But in restorative justice, we're looking into the future. Well, things have happened. We cannot avoid what has happened, but we can implement actions so as to overcome more positively the consequences. And we believe that these actions can take place with processes such as mediation. It is not just about having the victimizer that has not fulfilled the rules, but here we're focusing really on the people, the victim and the victimizers. We should empower the victim, and we understand that this needs to be done boosting restorative justice so as to achieve all of these items. Thank you.
Impliquéis al máximo.
So we would ask you attorneys to involve yourselves to the full in these terms that could result in a different form of accompanying the victims from what occurs when we depart from that road. Thus, to the extent to which the bar associations, also through the guide that we've just presented, because along that line, as we call for help from the insurance firms. So let's give the floor to Manuel Mascaraque. So, the insurance company can do a lot, particularly in the direct relationship with the victims. It shouldn't be cold and just negotiating an amount. I mean, it is that as well. I mean, it is the economic consequences, but for the victim to become a person, that we've made a person, this person, and that we should be, I mean, there's a lot to do. The victims, we're all victims. Pedro Navarro and Ramon also in the service. We're not, we're talking also about urban mobility, how we move, and the way we move is increasingly, by electric bike. I'm sorry, I've just entirely lost my sound. Now I've got it back. Sorry, I'm a victim because I've been run over by a car. And if I'm a victim of an electric bike or an electric scooter that is pelting along the road, then I should also, you know, have a form of demand, or am I going to be unprotected as a victim? You know, there's no obligatory insurance. So could you give us the vision, that outlook? Thank you, Manuel, for being here. Yep, thank you. Hello, I can't hear the gentleman. Now, okay. Maybe this is the least emotive side of things. At the end of the day, our work in the process is to compensate, to, if you like, repair. Repair is obviously impossible, as we've heard here this morning, to repair this pain, this moral harm, the damage that this person has suffered through the traffic accident. And I think in terms of compensation, which is what concerns us, and is at the end of the process, at the end of a civil or criminal process, when the guilt has been determined, we then have to make this compensation. What we could say is that since 2016, with the new assessment evaluation system, which was completely reformed, the compensation provided for is never going to be sufficiently fair, or maybe dignified from the victim's point of view. But we could say that at the moment, our compensation, the compensation available to us, is reasonable, both in terms of the material and the moral damage. I think, I don't know, in the case of third-party compensation, medical needs, all the rest of it, I think that with all of the damage that is done and incorporated in the valuing system, I think we've made great progress. But obviously, there's a lot of work to do, and the follow-up committee is a dynamic committee where we are in relationship, we are dealing with the victims associations, you know, all the way through from the initial idea through to the publication of the law in 2016. And at the moment, we are pending an amendment to the Third Party Liability Act, and the compensation system is going to be revised given the work of the Commission and the committee. And well, in reality, we are again reviewing the individual damage, the equity damage, and so on and so forth, the material damage. And this is an ongoing process of improvement where we are continuously looking at this to see where we can improve. I think that, you know, it's something that bit by bit, step by step, we are completing the system to make it a good system. I mean, we can do other things in favor of the victims, such as, for example, in our action plan, we have actions established for 2024 focused on vulnerable victims. Here, we include the victims of road accidents. The car sector is one of the most relevant areas in insurance, and it's here that we also had the idea of improving the attention to road accident victims in our guide of best practices. We have a guide of best practices, and one of them was to see how best we could show with the conveyance of an accident, with the compensation, how we could improve our empathy, to use clear, simple language, to be more transparent, to show greater respect to the victims. I think in the case of death, there's a lot of things that we could do to improve, and it's all of this that is on the table for us at the moment. And so your guide, I think, is a wonderful idea. I think it's also going to serve for what we're doing, our work on developing our best practices guide. We'll use probably a lot of things that you've done, and we'll continue to work on improving that. So there's a lot of room for improvement. In terms of new forms of mobility that you mentioned, well, it's clear if you have to choose whether to be run over on a zebra crossing by a car or a scooter, I'm going to choose the vehicle because, you've got the whole system in place there. There is the assessment system, and there's no, you're not dependent on a voluntary third-party liability policy where the kind of amounts are very low and it doesn't offer sufficient protection for the victims. So in our tracking committee, in the amendment of the law, there will be a provision which is going to ask the committee to set up a report, to draft a report on the compensation system for these vehicles and whether or not there should be a compulsory insurance policy for these vehicles. I think obviously we do need a compulsory insurance policy. A lot is being done in the local administrations where they are regulating for this in the municipal ordinances, the requirement for insurance. But before we come to that, we need to be clear about the whole ecosystem there is around the vehicle to ensure that it complies with the highway code, because these vehicles are not vehicles that comply with any regulations. They use them on the pavements, they take corners the wrong way. There is a complete want of discipline in the users of these vehicles, and I think that we need to penalize this kind of conduct. At the moment, there's a significant amount of laxitude in what's being done. And once we have this ecosystem of road safety, let's say, in place, maybe also with measures to protect the users too, once we have that whole ecosystem fully developed, then it would be the time to have a compulsory insurance system. Thank you very much. Now we're going to open the floor to anybody who wants to ask a question or make a comment. But before doing so, I'm going to ask all of you here to do something, because before with Dr. Torralba and with Yolanda, Isabel was also here, people who have participated actively in the drafting of this guide. We've said we need to disseminate it. So how can we ensure that it reaches as many people as possible, this guide? And given that we've got so many important people here, how can we do that? The General Directorate for Traffic, are you going to help us to ensure that this guide, which is already here drafted, could be officially disseminated by the General Directorate for traffic to all of the operators, the same for the Catalan Traffic Service, for the Bar Association, for the District Attorney's Department, and you're connected with all of the other fiscal departments. Can you help us with this? The police school, all of you. There are so many people, or the other associations here. Can you also help us to ensure that, this isn't, I mean, it shouldn't just be something that's stuck on a shelf and forgotten about. I'm going to, ask all of you to do what you can. In the School of Judges, I'm going to make sure that all of the judges get it, so that if one day, all of the people that come into the school end up in the courts. So, they could even end up in the Supreme Court. I'm going to make sure that each of them leaves the school with a copy of it, because this is going to help them to develop their empathy. That's homework for you all, for each and every one of you, to the extent that you can, to help us to foster the dissemination of this guide. And it shouldn't just be something, that ends up stuck on a shelf. Yolanda, maybe you could also help us with the moderation of this Q&A session now. Is this working? Yes. Well, thank you for this point, Jordi. It's vital We couldn't just, leave the guide there. We need to foster it on an international level. We've got Aleksandra with us who can help us. And well, let's go back to fielding questions or comments from the audience. Okay, Q&A. So, okay, I'll take you in order. Sorry, we can't hear anything at the moment.
Monse procuradores también, ¿eh?
And also my name is Alejandro Perez. I'm a retired attorney. Our office defended traffic victims. We have a pure outlook on the victim, not even of the insurance company. And I'm sorry to say that in our day-to-day work, this guide of best practices, we consider it to be hard to apply if the courts do not support it, because the courts that specialize in road violence, if they don't adopt it, what do I mean? When we go to the court of instruction, and you are the attorney supporting the victims of the accident. I go with the mother of the kid who was killed, who was run over by a guy who was driving with a huge amount of alcohol in his body or drugs. But you are, the attorney there for the accident, in inverted commas. Why? Well, because they are instructing in the court. They deal with murders, rape, and at the end of the day, the feeling is in the court that this is just a road accident. That's imprudence. It's not a crime. But somebody who drives under the influence of drugs, of alcohol, they drive at 100 kilometers an hour on a city street and run over somebody's kid. Is that an accident? As the court's concerned, it's an accident because they've got far more important things to do. They've got the Georgian mafia and things, and there are 50 statements that they have to take. So they want to get rid of you quickly. And then, you go to the forensic expert, and the forensic expert, as they see many atrocities, you can't even get through the door. And they say, no, just the victim. And I say, look, no, I am their attorney and I want to accompany with them. You look at the fiscal expert, sorry, the forensic expert in the eyes and say, look, I've got to be in there. So maybe the solution requires specialized courts. And, when you appear, it's crazy. Don't misunderstand me. There are courts that specialize in gender violence. I've looked at the figures now, and I mean, it's not comparable, but in Spain this year, 50 women have died at the hands of their husbands. I mean, don't look at the traffic accident stats, because I think maybe they multiply that figure by 50. But we, set these courts up for gender violence, but for road violence, which is what it should be called in the court, we've done nothing. And at the end of the day, we go to these courts, which, as they've got so many different things on their plate, and many of which are much or very serious, at least, you end up just being, oh, that's the attorney for the accident. And one of the solutions for this guide of best practices to be really applied, you could go to the forensic doctor, you could have a specialized doctor in road accidents. Shouldn't be the same doctor who's looking at a rape, a violent rape, because at the end of the day, you start. I think that specialization of the courts, it would be much better if we had that, to ensure that this guide of best practice is employed properly. I don't know what other people may think of that, other specialists. What do you think? Thank you very much for your attention. I think specialization is key. I mean, nobody knows everything about everything. So, I mean, since 2016, the fiscal service has specialized. And I think that, yes, it's very noticeable that we have specialists of all kinds. And when they, take on the cases, it's noticeable, but not just in road safety, because at the end of the day, it's focusing on a specific area. And you shouldn't just, be a jack of all trades. You need to specialize, obviously with different means, but we are what we are. So courts, we do specialize with specialized staff. I think to have that for road accidents, it would be a significant change. I fully agree.
Thank you. I have some comments and then maybe some questions. Just on just this discussion of specialization, I would personally say that I'm actually against it, because you cannot find the end to specializations. If you specialize for domestic violence, gender-based violence, and then you specialize for sexual violence, and then you specialize for road traffic accidents, and you specialize for terrorism, and then you specialize for murder, and then maybe you specialize for robberies, and then you kind of end up in these little clusters of specializations, and it's very difficult then to see the full picture. And what we see is that needs of victims are the same. And so in their essence, they come to these 5: respect and recognition, support and information, access to justice, protection, compensation, restoration. And then you can have some specialization to address certain needs in a certain way, but also as a lawyer, I think it's a very difficult task to organize justice systems around very narrow specializations. And that's where we end up with like putting people in boxes, and then whoever does not qualify to enter into our box is actually left behind. And so I would strongly advise even against the gender-based violence approach here in Spain, because you have great system for victims of gender-based violence, quite a good system for victims of terrorism, and that's all that you have. You don't have system for supporting victims of just murder. So someone broke into my house and murdered me, and there's no system because it's not gender-based violence, it's not terrorism. So I really have to strongly advise against strict specialization in justice. So that's just my opinion. But of course, you are creators of your own justice systems. Another comment is on compensation. So the EU Directive on Victim Rights recommends compensation to be decided whenever possible within the criminal proceedings. And the new proposal is actually suggesting a state system of compensation, which is actually something that we also advocate for as Victim Support Europe. And if you just look further up north, your next door neighbors, not far from here in France, they have this national solidarity compensation system, where even like I would actually prefer to be hit by a scooter than an uninsured car, because they can damage me a bit less. And even though car insurance is compulsory, not every car is actually insured. And then you have different levels of insurance, etc. What they have in France is actually something that we advocate for, and that's a state compensation system for all victims. Because then you don't have hierarchy of victims. You don't have victims of terrorism or traffic violence who are covered, and then victims of scooters or home invasions, unless you have insurance, are not covered. So what they have in France is actually this state system of compensation, and the proposal of the Victims' Rights Directive is actually going in that direction. So fingers crossed that it gets adopted, but if it gets adopted, then you'll have to change your compensation system again, which is not a bad thing. And because this is I will not go into detail, but they have separate compensation fund for victims of traffic violence or traffic incidents. And then they have another compensation fund for victims of crime, and they work hand in hand and are based on insurance, but we can discuss later on. And then third thing, and that's the commentary for the justice. I think the guide is great, but it's nowhere enough. You need to have actually part of your training for your future judges and prosecutors has to be around understanding trauma and building empathy and effective communication. Because if you have judges and prosecutors who don't understand how trauma impacts human brain and human behavior, we will never get to this ideal justice system that I was talking about before. Because there are some great judges and prosecutors who have empathy, who have the understanding, and who are able to kind of communicate in effective way with victims, but we also see people who are, I mean, you know, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a psychologist, but borderline psychopaths who work in the judiciary and who have such a distance from people that they're working with, and they use their profession to actually distance themselves from people and to hide themselves behind the bench that they're sitting on and say, well, you know, my job here is just to look at the law and then the facts and evidence. My job is not to show empathy and show understanding. And this is where we get secondary victimization, because we can be empathetic and we can hold that child's hand and still remain professional and still collect evidence, because there is nowhere in any law that you are prohibited from empathizing with people that you're working with. And this, I think, is a big part of our justice systems, where we have to have that part of training, not just the handbook, because people may or may not read it, but actually training and sort of drill that into their daily practice to have the understanding, the empathy. And then one thing that I haven't mentioned, and I think especially like in view of people who work with victims on a daily basis, the incidence of PTSD in legal profession is much higher than in general population. And psychologists have supervision, judges and prosecutors don't. And so judges and prosecutors, in order to be empathetic and to be able to rule in the courtroom in an empathetic way and be a human being and not a psychopath, they need their own professional well-being. And we don't do that either. And that's what's missing from the legal profession. So, so there. But that all needs to be built into the system. So, I mean, this is an amazing first step, but it's just the first step. There's so much to achieve. So anyway, happy to work with you on this.
Thank you so much, Aleksandra.
Quería comentar solo un aspecto que estoy de acuerdo con lo que se decía
You
ahora.
touch on a topic that I totally agree with. We're not going to solve too much if we just read in full this guide one day. We need to see how we can be able to help to be more empathetic, and to do that, and we had already talked about this with Yolanda, and Stop Accidentes is here, we need to see how judges, when they are being trained, they have a greater contact with the reality of victims and what all of this means. And along these lines, I would like to say that we go to psychiatric centers, because when they decide to force someone in a place because, well, they do not want to get into a psychiatric center, but it's a judge who decides that, and we go also to see how an autopsy is done, to see how the judges use those data from the autopsy so that it can be interpreted. We go with the police, the traffic police as well. We go with them to check how the alcohol test is done, to see how the tests are done, what they do with this information. We also go with the Catalan police, with the national police, so as to be in touch, direct touch with the police entities. We also need a direct touch with the reality of victims, and you associations can help us a lot. This as far as the training that you meant. Yes, and in this training in trauma that you also mentioned, which is very important, the training in trauma is essential so as to understand what happens in our brain and also the emotions and the life of people. But maybe Nicolas can also say something along these lines. I will be very brief because I totally agree with what you just said. For me, maybe this doesn't sound popular, but I would also be very cautious with this specialization, and I don't know if we have enough resources for that. I would prefer to have a training, a sound training of all of the legal agents, even the psychologists, those of us who are working in the legal arena, because sometimes we don't have enough training in empathy, in trauma, to understand what happens happens in the brain of a person who went through this, not only the victim, but also the victimizer, because sometimes it's traumatic for them too. And I especially focus in my PhD on how to improve empathy in gender violence victimizers. But sometimes I also work with professionals who are working with men who have carried out sexual violence. And sometimes for these professionals, it is difficult to empathize with these victimizers. They say, no, I cannot work with them because I cannot empathize, and I know I should empathize. And what we're talking about in some programs, it's not the concept of empathy, because it's very difficult, and it's difficult to explain from a scientific point of view and to measure it. But we're starting to use a concept which is the concept of optimal proximity. Optimal proximity is a concept. It's this kind of proximity that allows you for enough emotional empathy, but just in the right amount so as to be objective in your work. This is essential. And I think that we should be trained along these lines. We, psychologists, social workers, and also the different agents in the courts, attorney, judges, everyone, more than the specialization of a specific court, because it would be a never-ending story and there would always be a crime with no specialized court anyway. Anyway, this is my point of view. I'm not an important person, but I am going to try and circulate this guide with all of the professionals that work in prisons, in crimes of violence. Yeah, we are all going to contribute. We're all important. There was one last question, Jordi. 3 questions. I don't know if we have time. I think we should be brief, please. Yes, I'll be brief. Good morning, Carlos Muletes from Stop Accidentes. A question for Nicholas. I am going to focus on the prevention, not on what has happened. So before it happens, in prevention, you said that we are trying to help the victimizers so that they do not carry out the same action again. There's a study that says that most of hostile accidents, it's because there's been a consumption of substances that alter our behavior, and then we make mistakes. So then my question is, Nicholas, when a person needs to consume because they are addicts and they are ill, there needs to be a reparation for that person. So my question is, a person who has carried out an accident because they were under drugs and they've been in jail for 4 years, how can they drive again when they are still addicts? There needs to be a reparation because this person has a lacking. So this is one thing. And then I wanted to say something else. We should have a deep revision of the criminal code to see what happens with accidents, road accidents, because if we are trying to apply exceptional measures and to have greater condemns, because there's been a revision in these kind of cases, well, maybe if this is going to boost other kinds of violence. I don't know, in my opinion. Sometimes if we have I don't know, maybe we can control the violence in one area, but then we could have more violence in another area. I don't know if I understood it well, but could we have a deep review in the crime code in road accidents to really focus on what we should be focusing? That's what I meant. Thank you. More than a question, I have a comment. Eugenia Domenic, many of us, we know each other, and I have actively participated in the guide. It's been a privilege. I wanted to say something. One of the essential things that we have noticed in the association and when drafting the guide and with the testimonials of the victims is that the system that we have, the system in which that the victim needs to face after a traffic accident, is that there's all of these legal procedures, and these are the ones that we have, and this is our legal systems. But one of the demands and needs of the victims is not to feel apart from this system. So if we all contribute, and it's about empathy, active listening, understanding the perspective of the victim, the vulnerability moment of the victim. It's about language. This is very important. The victim needs to understand what they're telling them, because I'm a lawyer, and in the legal sector we're used to specific language, we know the proceedings, but victims come to our association, and they come with a whole set of reports and files that they have been given, and they don't understand what they mean. So we need to change our perspective in the sense that we need to get close to the victims. It's not that the victims should adapt to a system, but we should get closer to the victims, always with a whole level of rigor, of course. I think that we're going along these lines, and at the end of the day, this is about making justice more human, making these legal proceedings closer to the victims, active listening, humanizing the process so as not to harm the victim more, because without realizing, sometimes we are even causing additional harm with our actions, and it makes no sense, and we could avoid that. And I said this in one of the meetings. I think that this would make us happier too if we work like this, if we feel closer to victims, and if we can give them this support besides the implementation of the law or the legal proceedings that have to take place. It's just a comment.
Hola, buen día.
Hello.
Soy funcionario de prisiones, compañero de Nicolás y profesor de permiso por puntos de los programas de reeducación y psicoeducación vial.
Family education. This is for the fiscal department, the prosecutor. With the problems that we have, 30%, tell me if I'm wrong, of penal affairs are related to crimes against the highway code. Nicholas, correct me, and I think that more or less we foresee 10% in Catalonia of people, the convicts, being for road crime. And this crime in absolute numbers and proportional numbers. So when I say 10% in prison, that means that 90% of those do not end up in prison. They have alternative sanctions, and the only place where they are treated and re-educated is with the point system on the driving license. And here I'm going to the fiscal department. Road safety trainers, we've seen for some time now that we're talking about some 6,000 students a year. We'd like to find many more, which we don't know where they are. But over recent years, we've realized that we are finding that there are people who come on our re-education programs. They come in 6-10 years after sentencing, not voluntarily speaking. It's a program where we bring them together with victims. Like Vicente said, they have the opportunity to ask for pardon. So oftentimes they don't come on the course until they want to renew their driving license and things, and they say, hey, you haven't done your re-education course. It's very difficult to affect behavior when the sentence was made 8-10 years ago. So the question is, isn't it possible, you know, that as number 22 in your guide of best practices, to remind that the re-education program is essential for somebody before they can take the wheel again? That's my question. Well, in Barcelona, there are 4 executive courts which oftentimes, when the driving license is returned because they've had their sentence, they add saying that in addition to, you know, them having served sentence, to recover their driving license, they have to do the course. But this is an administrative issue. The court, once they've had their driving license returned, it's filed because it's not in the penal area. The question of controlling an administrative effect, that the executive means that, you know, they've already had their sentence and that's the end of our work. It is true that oftentimes the do consider it without prejudice in the administrative area. But beyond that, those that are diligent and they're included and they're placed to favor, there's no possibility of control, because if it's not done, it's an administrative infraction, not a crime. So that's where our work ends. I think things would need to be turned around there with that. Yep. Hello. I'm sorry, we can't hear the gentleman properly. I'm sorry, I can't translate this.
Hola, buenas tardes. Vale, yo
Hi,
soy
good afternoon. My name is Sergio. I'm a road safety trainer, and I'm also a trainer for the re-education and awareness course. And in this case, with all of my respect for the session today, I'm going to skip. You've missed the first link, which is education, basic education. I'm saying that there should be a lot more support to the education system before there is an accident and a victim. An example that I have is completely legal. It's a personal example. My daughter at 15 is beginning to learn to drive with me in the car, completely legally, for her to understand the risks there are in all respects when driving, be she a pedestrian on a on a scooter or whatever, on a skateboard, a scooter or whatever. So I am calling to ensure that we have greater support. I mean, this grain of sand that we wish to bring to it, so that at the end of the day, the educators, those trained, become great drivers, understand the risks, and avoid coming to what we're talking about. And an example, and this is a question, I don't know whether Pedro Navarro is still here, and that is a personal doubt that I have, because the first driving license, which is for a moped, to get that license, they don't have to go to a driving school. And I would appreciate it if there were educational classes for all kinds of road users, to achieve awareness, for people to be aware of all of the risks involved. Thank you. Now, okay, hi, good morning, and thank you. It's been a very interesting session, and I simply wanted to make a couple of reflections regarding the need, I'm convinced, of a special jurisdiction. First of all, because of reasons of social alarm in terms of the number of victims there are, and then the level of specialization, juridical specialization, that they wouldn't deal with other kinds of breaches of the penal code. I mean, it would be ridiculous to have specific jurisdictions for each kind of crime. Here, it's a crime of imprudence and civil liability. So we're talking about a mixed dimension in terms of a jurisdictional point of view, which is enforced by the criminal system. So I think that this is an argument which should be reflected in terms not only of legal coherence, but also in terms of what's going on in terms of the punitive response. On the one hand, the length of time the penal process takes is so frustrating for the victims, and that is in detriment of thinking that penal law is what we all need. We're talking about restorative justice, and in the penal code, when you see a victim of this kind of accident who are frustrated by the length of the process, the first thing that they want is for the prison sentences to be lengthened. I think having a special court, we would, make it far faster, and we would avoid what is happening so much today, that the best attorneys and the victims call for friendly agreements to avoid the torture of the length of the procedure, given that oftentimes the legal costs are huge if the person has survived, if they have severe injuries. So I'm just underscoring all of this, and I think we should reflect on the need for this. I think a want of means is never a valid argument if public policy is improved and we cheapen the cost of other penal processes, auditing, legal costs. These very lengthy procedures cost a fortune and they're not efficient. So I think it would be a very interesting thing to study. Okay, I'll wind up now. Congratulations to you all. A lot of us already know each other very well, particularly you, Nicholas. I'll wind up with 1 minute talking about my own experience in my process of grief. And, I'm here unconditionally for whatever you need. 2 years from the passing away of my son, together in agreement with the people who were with me at the time, I enabled myself to be brave enough to have a face-to-face with the car driver. It was a victimizer and a victim encounter. I went to the guy's home. I hugged his parents, and that day, and we each asked forgiveness. I asked his forgiveness for having prejudged him, and he, without words, but his hug said it all. So I'm saying this here between these four walls. At that moment, in my process of grieving, I distinguished the conduct of the person from the person themselves. We're hearing this here. I said to him, you must have a second opportunity as an individual. Afterwards, the justice system will say what that all comes to, but you deserve a second opportunity. And now, I'm here to help you with whatever you want. And I don't think I'm a weirdo, because this ability, this capacity, this energy, this capacity for love, we all have it inside ourselves. But, I'm talking about your 2 nights. Can you imagine 500 nights? And this is, that fear is what holds us back. But at times, we do have this valor, this braveness to tackle that. I'm sorry, the gentleman wasn't speaking into the microphone at the end. Well, I know there are many questions and comments, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. I'm so sorry, but I think, Jordi, we're going to have to wind up. You have the final word as the moderator. Unfortunately, the final word is not being said into the microphone. Do you have any final reflections? Well, in these encounters of young judges, what really hits me is it's an amazing experience to have this meeting with these people, and you see that oftentimes what they say, the things they say are not happening. They're excited, they want to do the best, they want to really be just, and then they find the courts overwhelmed with a system that just swallows them up. So I think, to provide this greater amount of empathy, humanity, proximity, it's not always easy to achieve. But for them, we also have the associations that here, and I'd like to congratulate Pat, because 25 symposia like this means there's so much work. Yolanda and Eugenia, who've been there for so many years, Monty, all of you who have collaborated with Pat, Vicente, all of you, Juan, I don't want to forget anybody, but what I do believe is that those of us who have had at any time responsibility in terms of road safety, public responsibility, we will never be able to thank you enough for the factor that proximity brings you to have contact with the associations and victims. So thank you very much to you all.
Muchísimas gracias a vosotros.
Thank you to you all. It's been a fascinating discussion, and we could be here hours and hours more, but I'm afraid time is pressing, and so I would like to invite you to change. And while we're changing over so that we have the people who are going to close the session, Pedro Navarro, Director of the General Directorate of Transit, Ramon Lamiel, now who is the Director of the Catalan Traffic Service, and Vicente Sanchez, who is the President of PAT. While the panel is changing, just a reflection, and that is that before we were talking about victims and not the categories of victims, because at the end of the day, what we need to do is to protect people, not harm them further. And it occurs to me to incorporate the Hippocratic maxima prima non dicere. The first thing that is most important is not to do harm. That's my reflection. And while the members of this closing panel come up, let me also say, now that we have the two directors, to say that this guide has also, thanks to the General Directorate of Traffic and the Catalan Traffic Service, because they've enabled us or helped us to make it a reality with the grant that we received from them. So I'm taking advantage of this occasion to publicly thank them for this support from the General Directorate for Traffic and the Catalan Traffic Service. So whenever you want, we'll start. Vicente? You're going to start?
Maybe Pera, Ramon, and Vicente. That's the order that we will follow. Hello, thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure to share this session. It's an opportunity to be here, to listen, to see. This encourages us to continue our daily effort to reduce traffic accidents. It is also a good opportunity because next Sunday it's the World Day of Victims of Road Accidents. So I believe that everything fits together in our territory. We will have different activities, commemorations to remember the road accident victims. I think that we've been working together for a long time. I think we started working together in the year 2000 when I got in touch with you with the Pact for Mobility in Barcelona. So we've been working together for more than 20 years. And along these lines, I would like to remember Ole Thompson. I always relate him to you, to Pat. He was the master. He was the one who brought to Barcelona and Spain the culture of mobility and road safety. We were doing other things here, but Oleg came and he said, no, here we have a different mobility, we have alternatives. He came from the north where there's all of this culture. And on road safety, it's the same thing. No one talked about it, but he taught us about it. He told us that we should prioritize road safety when managing traffic. And he was saying, and you're not doing this in the city council. So I think that we all owe him a lot. And I would like to remember him here. There's a couple of things that I wrote down based on what has been mentioned. There was a testimonial. There was a question and an answer that was worthwhile underlining here. For example, if there's been an accident and my daughter has died, why am I here in this PAT association? And she said, because I don't want no one else to go through what I went through. This is super profound because when you lose a family relative in a road accident, life makes no sense. You would abandon, but the strength comes from working so that no one else goes through what you've gone through. So instead of being depressed at home, you need to go out, look for a victims association, start working, and then you see these results. Because there is a topic which is when there is a Congress on road safety or whatever, and specifically in this time where everything is big data, the cloud, 5G, well, it's good to hear a testimonial between the different speakers. You know, we get back to the ground, down to the ground, because nowadays everything is new technologies, the cloud. No, let's listen to a testimonial, what they went through. This is huge. It helps us get grounded, because sometimes we get confused with new technologies and we think that new technologies will solve everything, and this is not the case. So it's very important to listen to the testimonials of victims and the role of victims in road safety in Spain. They have voice and visibility. This is one of the best things that we've done in this country. We're a reference here and beyond. So much so that I believe that without the contribution of the victims associations, we wouldn't have been able to obtain the results that we have. So thank you very much. They were talking about the directive, the Victims' Rights Directive. I remember when we got the first draft, there were the victims of crimes, and then we just said, what about the traffic victims? We need to push it somehow. So now they are included, but they weren't. Or Office of Victims that we have in the Justice Administration. We have offices that are helping crime victims, but there was no traffic victims. So we had a debate in our center to say, no, we need to have some victims for we need to have some offices for traffic victims. And we said, look, why not having offices for all different kind of victims, but that they work for everyone?
Lo ha dicho la abogado, la Degana de Figueres.
And the dean from Figueres mentioned something quite interesting. We need human means in the legal system, and we all take it for granted. We all say, yeah, we are lacking means and human means as well. Look, we need a legal system that works, because otherwise the whole country will not work, because we should improve the situation every year, and we're not improving every year. So sometimes we just take for granted, oh yeah, we're lacking means and human resources. So yeah, this proceeding will take 2 or 3 years. What do you mean 2 or 3 years? And we take it for granted that this is normal. No, this should not be normal, because this is not good for victims. They need to live over and over again the painful process. And I'm saying this from the administration point of view as well. We need an administration that works if we want the country to work. And right now, this is not the case. As for the insurance and the insurance companies, I would like to underline 2 things. First of all, the consortium of compensation of insurances, so that even if people have not paid the insurance, we can cover. This is a model that everyone likes. There's some things that have been well done in this country, and this is a success story. And I don't know if we are aware of the things that we do well. This is a model that works, and everyone uses or looks at the Spanish model as a very good model. I think that we also have a tool which is not quite common, which is all of us to get together to reach a value. It's like a guide that we're using, where we are all more or less agreeing. And it is important to reach an agreement, because here we have the victims associations, the victim lawyers, and the insurance companies. They all reach an agreement to reach a value. I would like to underline the importance of this. And as for the guide, I believe that this next week and next week the government will change, so we'll see. But I think that as for next week, this will be in the website, and we will also draft a report or something in the traffic journal that we do. We do a journal which is a reference in Latin America. In Latin America, there's a lot of room for improvement. So this can be especially useful for Latin America. You gave it to me on paper, but I would like to have it online. Well, someone was talking about, 2 things I would like to mention. Today, midday, more or less, there will be a president in our government. Oh, we already have one? Okay, we already have the president. Well, I'm saying this because I think it would be good to think about the last legislation. It has been a very complex legislation with COVID, with the inflation, with many things, but I believe that for us it's been legislation that was more or less okay, and it was profitable because of two topics. First of all, mobility. There was nothing, and now we have a Ministry of Mobility. This is good. We had been asking for it for years, because the prior indispensable condition for safety to work is for mobility to work. If mobility works, road safety works. But if mobility doesn't work, there is no possibility to have road safety. Both things need to go hand on hand. So now we have this mobility. We have this mobility department. So we've approved this legislation, and well, we had been tackling all of these issues in the Congress. We will have a mobility legislation. So I believe that we have all of the structure to be a reference in mobility. Our challenge is to be a reference in mobility. And next, something which is important, and we will remember in this legislation, is education, the LOMLOE. In all of the sector, we've been for 30 years or more asking for including road education in schools. There's been lots of initiatives, associations, local police that were going to schools, but everything was scattered. But right now, in this new education system, we have road safety and sustainable safe mobility is compulsory in all of the curriculum, primary and secondary schools, and it is in the physical education subject. They are so happy, these teachers, to be able to teach mobility. This is like learning how to ride a bicycle. And we have all of the training in road safety in primary, secondary, and later on. So the children are going to leave our schools knowing how to behave. There's no exam for this, but they will be able to ride a bike, to ride a scooter, to walk in the street. So I believe that this is a very important progress. And then also, one thing is to publish this in our state bulletin, and the other thing is to make this work. So I hope that this is going to work as we want. Next, for the first time, we have regulated vocational training. We are training people in safe, sustainable mobility. It's a title, 2,000 hours, 2 years, and 27 centers are teaching this. And they all say that they had more demand than the places that they could offer. So we have good value right now. There was no regulated training in mobility and road safety. There was just a few of us working on this. So now we have a higher rank, and it seems it's successful, and I think that this is a future profession, everything that has to do with mobility and road safety, and this has also been implemented. But now we need to make this work. We need to make the most of the opportunity. This is the idea that we have in this legislation. I would also like to talk about the idea that you will hear that road safety, well, that Spain is a reference, that we have 37 deaths per million inhabitants. We are ahead of France and Austria in the EU, that's 46 every million, but we should still be working hard on this, because we still have lots of deaths a year. And also, we should be working on this because in the elections we were checking the figures and what the political programs were talking about, and it seemed like road safety was not important for them. So I have an anecdote here. The Commission of Road Safety, well, we had one in the Congress and it was working well and we were doing lots of things. But then there was a crisis in the party and then they had to place Teodoro there. We had to place him somewhere and they didn't know where to put it. And then they placed him in our commission as a president of road safety. He was there for a year and I was not able to talk to him. They say that all of this is very important and that everyone's aware of this. I think it was Teodoro Garcia Gea. Anyway, they placed them as a president of the commission in the commission of road safety. It's not important for them. So, and finally, just one last message. This is a time of change and transformation. Everything's liquid, everything's changing. There's a lot of uncertainty, but there's something that doesn't change. The values of road safety. So sharing the public road. I'm not on my own. I have to think on others. There's some rules that I have to stick to. This is very powerful. And everything's liquid, everything changes, but this does not change, these values. And this is what gives us strength. This is what is giving us strength of those of us who work on road safety. And basically, this is it. I would like to thank you for everything that you do. I would like to thank Pat for their invitation. Thank you. I finished.
Muchas gracias, Pera. Y damos paso a Ramón Lamiel.
Thank you, Pera. We'll give the floor to Ramon Lamiel, who's director of the Catalan Traffic Service, Road Service. Good morning. Thank you very much for your invitation. 25 years is a lot of years. This is the 25th. It's a reason for celebration. Moreover, it's a magic figure. This 25 coincides with the 25th anniversary of the Catalan Traffic Service, with the 25th anniversary of our traffic service in the Catalan police force, and in all of this time accompanied by Latourson, who I'm afraid we all miss. I'd like to make special mention of him. I was saying that thank you for the invitation, which has been a great pleasure to be here with you all today. 25 years is a magic figure because 25 years is also, as I say, our birthday. The gentleman is repeating this, and also the Catalan police force. So it's a happy coincidence of these 25 years. Now, at the Pompeu Fabra University, there was a postgraduate course in humanities, which was a very interesting course. It was called Empathy, Sympathy, and the Origin of Morals. And this postgraduate course, which was given by the Humanities Department, was given by Novasca Karim, who was an eminent Catalan neurologist, a primatologist with whom I shared my undergraduate course in biology, called Karma Mater. And they explained something more than empathy. Empathy has been spoken of a lot. That's what it says in the guide here, empathy. Empathy is to place yourself in the other's shoes. So to understand exactly what is happening to the other. There's a whole series of mechanisms in the brain related to the frontal lobe and so on and so forth, which allows you to understand what's going on in the person. Without going in further, sympathy is not just smiling and laughing. It's a question of reducing somebody's suffering. And as we heard from Alas, who told us this in her supper, that's where morals are born. That is, if you like, ethics, religions, and so on and so forth. What other behavioral specialists call the natural good. And that is the combination of empathy, sympathy, and ethics. So this chain of events which leads us to ethics, I think that this is what this guide is attempting to provide and reflect on, because at the end of the day, it is a guide for the ethical behavior of the administration. We as an administration should do more than disseminate the guide, and I do commit to doing this as the Catalan traffic service, but in the Catalan government as well. We should actually take the guide on board to incorporate these ethical best practices in the guide. I found myself reflecting on the ethics of public services, and it's very important for us to, at the moment, reflect too on how we should help traffic victims, particularly in the administration of justice. So once again, I would like to congratulate you, because ethics are essential for this natural good, so that the administration can act properly in an attentive, empathetic, sympathetic, ethical way. This seems very obvious, easy to say, and it's as if public services were to have really taken on board this ethical chain. But remember what happened during the pandemic lockdown, and now we can reflect on what happened during lockdown and how the administration treated the co-citizens. Many citizens were treated in a crude way, a hard way, what happened in many hospitals. And this is something I had to deal with in the care for the elderly or the people with disabilities. It was cruel, significantly cruel. The want of care, of personalized care, the want of the care for the person and their environment. And yes, we battled the pandemic, the virus, but we forgot about the people with their baggage and all of their feelings. So this experience should serve as an example of how we should attempt to follow this ethical change. As I repeat, empathy, action, sympathy, and ethics in public administration, and to impose this at all levels of administration. And I repeat, as the Catalan Traffic Service, I commit myself to doing so. I'd like to underscore certain aspects of this guide, which are to an extent common sense in terms of the public administration, but which we don't normally see, or not all of them at least. It refers in point 14, but in many other places also, it makes reference to a slogan of other groups, which is nothing about us without us. So here, what we need to see is the participation of the victims of a road accident participating, and those around them should participate in the administration of justice. Other maybe very evident elements, which maybe are not so normal to find, is the language and behavior. We speak about language in many cases and conduct, which is a manifestation of the origin of ethics and morals, which is again another form of language, because language is not only verbal but non-verbal. So behavior, conduct is also that. The language should be understandable and accessible, referring to accessibility for all kinds of groups, but understandable. I can imagine, if you think about the language of justice, it's incomprehensible to all of us. So imagine a person who is going through personal grief, who is not used to this kind of language. So this language, in terms of universal access, is called communicative access, easy to read. So we need to include that, the ease to read the language of the administration, and of course, above all, in the administration of justice. With regard to grief and intimacy, I'm talking about the mediators, this space of intimacy, grieving, mourning, this person who accompanies the individual throughout this process of grief, the trauma, the personal tragedy, the family tragedy, the person who accompanies them through different stages to ensure that it is more understandable. Everything is more understandable for them. So it's also essential to have this, what we call a case manager, this accompanying mediator, if you like. and many other aspects which figure in this document, which I'm not going to detail now because I'm sure that it's already been mentioned. I'm not going to give you a spoiler. You should read the guide yourselves. I had the opportunity of reading it before coming in here. I found it very interesting just to highlight these points, which I also wanted to refer to here when speaking to you. What can we do as the Catalan Traffic Service, apart from taking on board these values in our everyday work as part of the public administration, to ensure that the Home Office also has this available to them? Because they have an interest in being able to incorporate this kind of thing. But above all, I want to make available so that it could be a reality, this guide, something that we know how to do as the Catalan Traffic Service Agency, and that is to render services to the victims. We offer a service to the victim after more than 10 years. It's called CIAP, the Service of Information and Attention to People who are victims of traffic accidents. And we've added this to a service which is specifically aimed at the seriously injured, both in their directed at their family and themselves and their surroundings, to ensure that they have everything they need. So this experience, this expertise as a victim care service, I would like to also place it at your service, so to ensure that there is this better ethical attention from the administration of justice, that we do everything we can. And to wind up, let me just mention a specific aspect. After just a year ago, the minister asked me to accompany him on a visit to a private home, a victim of a traffic accident. It was the mother of the son who had passed away. We were in the home, we had a lengthy discussion, and they mentioned some aspects of this crudity of the administration, particularly the administration of justice, how she had not been able to say farewell to her son, who walked out of the door on a Friday afternoon, and they had to bury him on the Monday morning. So maybe we should have accompanied this individual, these families, the victims, in a better way. In fact, we have talked about this. And just to wind up talking about participation, I would like to invite you this coming week. We're going to have a participative session. We're working on our plan for road safety 24-26 with lots of ideas, some of them proposed by the victims associations, but we would like to invite you, please, to come along to participate next week to see how we can take on board all of these strategies. So to be close and to people who are there with all of their families. Thank you for this session. I say empathy, sympathy, and ethics in the administration.
Thank you, Ramon. Now, Vicente Sanchez, President of PAT. Thank you very much. I am not going to say much. I think I'm not going to say much because I want you to remember what our colleagues and friends just said. Don't forget what they said, because they said very important things. And if I talk, maybe you will not remember well what they said. So I just wanted to thank you for being here today. For me and for us, it was a very important day. I would like to thank all the people who contributed. We thought that this was going to be difficult, but in the end we made it. And today we can prove that this has been possible. It seemed impossible, but it has become true. I think it is going to be very useful. I trust that this is going to be disseminated and people will understand it. And those of us who've gone through the tough moments of this road accident, that you're waiting for some help, and instead of finding help, you find obstacles, terrible obstacles. Well, we hope that with this and with everything that we can do, well, every time there will be at least, I know that the situation and the grief will be there, but at least we hope that we are contributing so that the situation does not worsen. I hope that these guides will not be necessary because the objective of PAT was to save lives. And we believe that we've contributed, all of us, to this objective, together with the collaboration of many people that have been able to change things in the General Director of Traffic and in the Catalan unit of traffic. And I started this path on the 12th of April, 28 years ago. And during these 28 years, we've been lucky enough, or we've had the ability as well, to talk to the people who drive. At that time, there were 17.2 people who were dying every day. And right now, we're around 5 people a day. And we think that this is a great success, but not enough. So, if in these 28 years we were able to go from 17.2 to 5, why not going from 5 to 0? We know it's possible. We just need to believe in it. So I hope that these guides will be useful for those who already got through the road accident. They will need to go through all of the painful process. But with this guide, we hope that we will be able to make things better and to reach 0 accidents, 0 deaths. I said I was not going to talk, but then I ended up talking. And today I felt old. I was never feeling like that. Yes, I was in the underground and they said, please sit down. And I thought, oh, they see that I'm old. So then I just thought, okay, let's talk today because maybe tomorrow I won't be able to come and talk to you. So that's it. If Olet were here, it would be great. He's not here, but I hope that he's watching us. Of course he's here. He's among us. Most of the things that we've achieved through PAT was thanks to Ole, Domene, Pared, and many other people who worked voluntarily. I came here because I needed a refuge, but they didn't need a refuge. They were just able to offer their knowledge, and they were fighting for something that they thought was unacceptable. So these people have a huge value. They are able to understand they were able to understand things just by seeing around them that many things had to be done. And before going for lunch, it would be good to keep 1 minute silence for what happened.
Muchísimas gracias.
Bueno, pues damos por concluidas las Jornadas Mediterráneas de Seguridad Vial en su edición número 25. Recordaros, como antes apuntaban, que el domingo, el tercer domingo de noviembre, es el Día Mundial en Memoria de las Víctimas de Tráfico y en el que desde PAD vamos a hacer diferentes actividades. En nuestra página web podéis ver las diferentes actividades que estamos organizando y también comentar que...
And also to say, and also I'll finish, this silence was very important for us to reflect and tackle this situation. Thank you all very much. Oh, by the way, the guide is now posted on the PAT website. You have it in an electronic format, and we'll send it obviously to you all so that you've got it and use it. Thank you all ever so much.